Welcome, and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. This is 2016, and we're looking at two people who are running for the office of President of the United States. One of them happens to be an expert in business, especially when it comes to real estate development and being able to raise quite a bit of money. The question is, will he be able to maneuver American taxpayers out from under their ever-increasing multi-trillion-dollar obligations to creditors, both foreign and domestic? Joining us here on the Beyond 50 radio program today is one of America's foremost experts on the history of U.S. currency. It is known that Trump has been able to amass a fortune for himself and his investors because he understands the mechanics of both credit and debt. Well, today we're going to evaluate whether or not he's going to be able to bring our deficit within control. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today our guest, Andrew Goss. Andrew, thank you for joining us here on the program today.
Oh, thanks so much for having me, Daniel.
Now, this is pretty interesting times because it seems like for the first time, and God knows how long, we've got somebody running for the office of President of the United States who isn't a politician. How do you think all this is going to shape up?
Well, I think not only is he not a politician, but he shares the values of most common Americans. You know, this is rare in a billionaire, right?
Without the truth.
We had a rich guy running last time, and I don't even recall meeting his family. You know, he hid them away and kind of kept everybody quiet. I see the contrast between the two. But it seems as though Mr. Trump, having been at one point so deeply mired in debt that it would appear he could never dig his way out, and from that to this, yeah, I would sure like to see him apply that to the Treasury and our, $19.3 trillion debt. So I believe that Mr. Trump gets the balance sheet right on USA Inc., it won't be long before we're back to the heyday of the United States. And certainly everyone should agree that we are in decline at the moment, and that's not a place that we should be.
Now, because you are, known to be an expert when it comes to money, talk about what needs to happen and how do you think he's possibly going to be able to handle something like getting the debt reeled in? Okay,
so we've transferred the cost of government entirely to the backs of the American worker. Everyone else has figured out how to avoid our taxes. So if you're an American company and you're productive and you're making a lot of money, you head offshore, where our tax rates are in the 30% range. You can headquarter your company in Ireland and only pay 12%. Or you can go to Dubai, or you can go to one of the Channel Islands. You could just move your operations offshore, if you will, and escape the taxation arm of the U.S. government. So, and foreign manufacturers, Mitsubishi Inc. and Hyundai, and name your car manufacturer, they sell millions of dollars worth of products in the United States and pay no income tax. They take their money back to their home country, and it's taxed there. So first and foremost, we need to give incentive to American businesses like Carrier Inc. not to pick up their factories and their headquarters and move to a foreign country. And the way that you do that is by slashing the corporate tax rate. So I think if you lower the corporate tax rate, and of course any American that's making less than $50,000 a family, to ask them to pay any of the cost of government, I think is unfair. And I think Mr. Trump agrees with that. So I noticed on his tax plan, anyone making less than $50,000 a year would pay no income tax. And then, of course, the trillions of dollars that are being held offshore by American companies such as Apple. Apple has a couple of $100 billion in an offshore subsidiary that they won't bring back to the United States because of that crazy corporate tax rate. So encouraging them to bring money back. And then, of course, a tariff on imported goods. That one just seems to be, I don't know how we missed that. We've tried this free trade experiment, and other countries prevent our goods from coming into their country through barriers. In China, you can't even own a company there. You have to have a Chinese partner owning 51%. And so we allow people from other countries to come into the United States, sell their goods here, take their profit back to their home country where they may or may not be following the environmental regulations that we have here or the union worker safety regulations we have here. They're certainly not providing health insurance for their employees, and all those costs are on American companies. We can offset all of that with a tariff. We imported $1.5 trillion worth of goods, $2 trillion worth of goods last year. We exported $1.5 trillion. A 100% tariff would roll $2 trillion into the Treasury almost instantly. So we cannot ignore the flood of foreign goods any longer. We must tax them and tax them appropriately to encourage these companies to come back to the United States with their manufacturing.
Now, I like one of the titles of one of your books is Uncle Sam Cooks the Books, and it seems that that's been a habit that we've had in this country for a long time. Do you see that potentially changing as well if he's elected to the office?
Indeed. Honesty is the best policy, and believe it or not, although we declare a $19.23 trillion debt, there is off the books another $20 to $40 trillion at least in unbonded liabilities. So we know they're coming due. We just haven't bonded for them yet, but we know we owe the money. And I remember when The Price of Loyalty, the book, came out by former President Bush's Treasury Secretary, who went in there, Paul O'Neill, and he looked at the books and he came out with an honest assessment of what it really was, and he was instantly given his walking papers. It's almost like we don't want to know the truth, but I think Mr. Trump will be a lot more forthcoming in what our real liabilities are and what our real problems are as it relates to the finances of this country. And let's face it, our finances are what's holding us back, and I think with a good, sound businessman who knows how to come from nothing to something, we can certainly straighten and turn the ship around.
Now, one of the things, too, that's always a concern is that, for instance, when we have that big bailout during the George W. Bush administration years of the insurance industry, the big question is, okay, well, what we're basically sending is a message that companies can kind of go out there and do whatever they want to. When they get themselves in trouble, they turn to the government and expect to be bailed out. How do you think Donald Trump would handle something like that?
Well, I'm hearing talk of a reinstitution of the Glass-Steagall policies. We dismantled Glass-Steagall under President Bill Clinton with the encouragement of Larry Summers and Robert Rubin. We said that banks could no longer or would no longer be restricted to simply taking deposits and making loans, and that now they could gamble and buy things and do whatever they thought they wanted to do with their depositors' money. And in fact, they went out and bought insurance companies, the merger of Travelers and Citigroup. They bought investment banks, the merger of J.P. Morgan and Chase. And so then that gave access, really, to the gamblers of the world, the deposits of America's working class. And that is, more than anything else, what caused this problem. When they were restricted to dealing with rich people's money or money that they could borrow from folks that could afford to lend it, they were restricted in how much money they had to invest and how much they could do. But once they gained access to this enormous pool of commercial deposits, just everybody's checking account, etc., it was almost too good to be true for a politician with an open checkbook, and too good to be true for a banker with ideas of grandeur. So they took the depositors' money and made less than sound investments, and of course then the government, because of FDIC insurance, was forced almost to come in and bail them out. So putting them back on the standard of Glass-Steagall is, you're a bank, you can take deposits and you can make loans, or you're an investment bank and then you can take money from people that have excess and invest it however you want. If you lose that, so what? Nobody cares. But when you start losing the deposits of the nation, well, now you've gone too far.
Now, it's really interesting when you take a look at the scheme of things. As you had mentioned earlier, it seems that he seems to be the voice of the aggravation that we feel about basically a very overstuffed, sloppy government that just feels they're going to go ahead and do whatever they're going to want to do, and you got anything to say about it, you might find yourself broke and even thrown in jail as a result of it. And one of the things that I've understood is that he also plans to audit the Federal Reserve. Is this true? And what does that mean exactly?
Well, Mr. Trump, I believe, understands the operations of the Federal Reserve, and many Americans don't. If they did, as Henry Ford put it, there would probably be a revolution before morning. The fact of the matter is that the power to coin money and regulate the value thereof was given to Congress in the Constitution, and that no state should make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debt. Why, that's Article 1 of the Constitution. So we have somehow delegated the power to create our money to a group of private banks. And this group of private banks doesn't seem to be operating in the best interest of the United States, and further, have gotten fabulously wealthy during the time that they've held this charter. So we granted the charter to the Federal Reserve in 1913, and yes, we've never audited them. And during that period, the Federal Reserve Bank's balance sheet has gone from $0 to $4 trillion, while our national debt, we went from being the biggest creditor nation on the planet in 1914 to the biggest debtor on the planet here 100 years later. So the operations of the Fed have yielded a dismal result, and having never audited the Fed, I mean, I know Ron Paul called for ending them altogether. My proposal, and I hope Mr. Trump embraces it, is to nationalize the Fed, just move them back into the Treasury. It seems insane to me that Congress spends $1,000 more than it takes in, and so it issues a bond. I owe you $1,000 plus interest. They hand that bond over to the Federal Reserve banks, who puts it in their vault, and then prints, effectively, 10 $100 bills, or electronically creates $1,000 and credits it to the Treasury's account. So now they have, previously having had nothing, now they have a $1,000 bond that yields interest every year, and we owe them. Why doesn't Congress just print the money? I don't understand why we need a middleman in there collecting interest with independence. So we spend $250 billion annually on interest. I think Mr. Trump will look at the operation and say, well, it's time to vertically integrate. Let's take the operations of the Federal Reserve and move them back into the Treasury, and instead of having, six-figure vice presidents working for a private bank, we'll have public servants handle the circumstances surrounding our money, and we get a lot more transparency. So, yeah, I think audit the Fed is probably somewhere near the top of Mr. Trump's list, because as Willie Sutton said, that's where the money is, They're the guys with the money, so I would check there first.
Yeah, it's gotten to a point, though, that people have become downright almost cynical, if you will, because, we heard that same rhetoric from Barack Obama when he was running for office back in 2008, and that was transparency of the government. Yet, apparently, this guy's been pulling a lot of crooked little deals and doing things that just haven't really been good for the American public. And you kind of scratch your head and wonder, well, are these people powerful enough, should they get into that level of service, that they're able to do the things you're suggesting? For instance, would Donald Trump be able to have the power to audit the Fed? I mean, obviously he does, but it doesn't seem they do once they get to that capacity.
And no, you're right. Once they get to that capacity, I love the line that Donald Trump Jr. used, or maybe it was Eric Trump. I'm just so impressed by those kids. One of them said, give the job to the guy who doesn't really need it. And that makes sense to me. Public service isn't supposed to be about self-gratification and self-enrichment. And, these folks that go into office never having held a private sector job, but yet come out wealthy and rich, there's something going on there that we don't quite understand. Now, I know this president has never been in business, has never been a businessman, has never been an investor, has never created a single thing. But yet, if he leaves the White House fabulously wealthy, shouldn't we want to know why? The president's job and other public service jobs are not supposed to be a pathway to individual wealth. It's supposed to be a duty, a public service. I would much rather have a president in office, and I think I would fear less. Certainly the power is there, one that thinks about his country before himself. That would be an oddity. It would certainly be a call back to our forefathers and not the professional politicians that we've been dealing with for the last 100 years.
Well, it's certainly refreshing to know you have somebody going into office that, potentially going into office, should I say, that, really has a grasp on the reality of how America works, because it's about innovation, it's about independent entrepreneurialism, things such as that. I mean, I loved starting a small business. I could have never imagined that you have such advantages, especially when it comes to taxes, than in starting and having your own little business to do. And, like you said, Barack Obama's never really done anything. He's just basically spent most of his time in education, learning about the Constitution, which he seems to have learned in such a way that now he figures he can kind of change those things. How do you see Trump in that particular role?
Well, I think Mr. Trump's vision of America is in sync with Americans and what we view as a vision of America. And so therefore, he would have no trouble elucidating it and talking about it and so on. Whereas Mr. Obama's vision of America, I don't think quite jibes with what a typical American would think. And so he has to not so much share with us his vision. And in fact, maybe tell us that his vision is something different from what it really is. It's just, it's not a good way to live your life, in my view. And I think, given the honesty that comes with potential President Trump versus what we've seen from these career politicians, which has been less than the truth, it would be something I think Americans would embrace.
Well, I always thought that one of the things we should eliminate is anybody ever having the potential to be a career politician. It's like you've served office once, you've done it for 4 years, you're done. You better go find something else to do. We don't care what capacity. You can't, maybe you're a representative, but you can't run for Senate, things like that. So you kind of start cleaning that out so you don't get these people that are busy in there, like the House of Cards, trying to figure out ways they can preserve their careers no matter how much it costs everybody else.
Absolutely. You hit it right on the head there. I think politicians in diapers should be changed often and for the same reason.
That's a funny way to put it there. So, now, what do you think the biggest problem, it seems, that Americans who are against Trump really have about Donald Trump? I mean, if this guy is really, the business visionary that he's been, I mean, look, this guy, he created The Apprentice, one of the #1 shows on television, for crying out loud. I know I enjoyed it. And the fact is this guy seems that when he goes in, that things actually do work.
Yeah, they get done. As living in the New York metropolitan area for the last 30 years and witnessing what he did with the West Side Rail Yards, what he did with the Woolman Rink, and, the business and the jobs that he created just right here in my sphere of the woods. And yeah, he stuck his name on everything, so you don't have any doubt who did it, But he did it, and when you look at it, when you look at Trump City, when you look at the West Side Rail Yards and Midtown, and single-handedly almost, he took New York out of Disney didn't even want to be anywhere near New York City when Donald Trump started building here, and so if what he did in the New York community is any indication of what he would be capable of at the federal level, it's like I can't get him in there fast enough. So for me, I think it's a clear-cut choice between his position on tariffs, his position on the individual income tax, and his ability to grow. This is what I think our current crop of politicians is missing. You can't just tax your way out of a problem and into prosperity. We, the public, feel taxed enough already. That was the basis of the Tea Party. But yet to those to whom this largesse is given, it's like I've always described democracy as 3 wolves and a sheep voting on what to have for lunch. No doubt if you're on the receiving end of government money, you want the status quo to continue. And I think those that are in that position who would rather get out there and get it for themselves would do well to take a second look at Trump.
Now, do you think that the possibility of him taking the oath of office for President of the United States, that he's going to, because, taxes are obviously a big concern, especially corporate tax rates, how do you think he's going to deal with the Internal Revenue Service?
Well, the idea that the IRS should be focused on picking the pockets of American workers, all of those IRS agents would be better served auditing foreign corporations that sell their goods here and enforcing a new tax system which would involve, if you're going to make money here, you're going to sell your goods here, you're going to pay taxes here. This idea that you could sell all you want here and then take the money back to your home country, well, that does rebuild or build the rest of the world, but it doesn't do us a bit of good. And so that leaves the IRS with the narrow job of harassing America's workers and America's companies into paying an ever-growing share of the tax burden. So deploying these agents in observing and enforcing U.S. tax code against foreigners and foreign companies that would import goods into the United States, I think that would be a better use of resources.
I think a lot of people would agree with you when it comes to that. It seems that you get out there and you're trying to pursue this American dream that every 4 years somebody's out there throwing the carrot up and taunting us with. Then as you pursue that, they're sitting there, they're beating you like a piñata and shaking every last dime out of you. And then on top of that, having the suspicion to believe that you're actually holding out on them.
Right.
You kind of get frustrated with that after a while.
And then a Chinese company replicates the product that you develop and starts underselling it in your marketplace. And the administration does absolutely nothing to prevent not only intellectual property theft. The person that invented that spin mop bucket found herself besieged by Chinese companies that had effectively stolen the design, reproduced the goods, and were now flooding the market with cheap imitations. Every success story in a garage has the same backstory. Where is our government when it comes to defending America's intellectual property rights? How is it that foreign companies can copy our goods right down to our space shuttle? Where is the protection and defense of American ingenuity? It's absent. It's sacrificed at the mantle of free trade. So I think we should get a handle on this, and certainly IRS agents are absolutely trained to spot in espionage. The Chinese, I know, have at least 2,000 front companies here in the United States with the sole purpose of industrial espionage. Put the IRS on them. Yeah, I get it. They're a Chinese company, and so theoretically they don't have to file a tax return in the United States, but that has to change. The idea that foreign companies can operate here without having to face the same IRS agents that an American company does doesn't make sense to me. The king never attacks his own children, at least aimed them in a place where they could do the American Treasury some good.
So how long do you think it would take for Trump to turn things around and for the experience of the American people to come to know or feel its impact?
I love the compare and contrast between him and John Kasich. The guy, the Republican who, after insisting that Mr. Trump sign this pledge that he would back whoever the nominee was, he didn't even show up at the convention in his own home state. This is Ohio Governor John Kasich. Now, his plan said, and I read it carefully, he said, if you elect me, by the end of my second term, I will have balanced the budget. Meaning that under his globalist Republican plan, he would keep all the policies currently in place, maybe raise your taxes a little bit, maybe cut a little government spending, and somehow at the end of 8 years, he will not be spending more than he takes in. He will have balanced the budget in 8 years. So another 8 years of $400 billion annual deficits, add another $3 or $4 trillion to the debt. maybe after 8 years, then we would start presumably paying principal. I contrast that to Donald Trump's plan, who said, and I don't know if he can do it, this would be Andrew Jackson style, pay off the debt in his 8 years. Now, it is a bold and ambitious plan, and a guy who tries to pay off a $20 trillion debt and only pays off half of it, I'm not going to be mad at him. But at least the idea that it is urgent and it needs to be taken care of, this attitude that deficits don't matter and we can just keep rolling on the debt, rolling it over and leaving it for our children and grandchildren, that's not what I plan to leave my children and grandchildren. In fact, I put away the real money of the United States, the old $20 gold pieces, the old silver dollars. That's what I intend to leave for my children and grandchildren. And, you know, I have a booklet about that I'll be happy to send to your listeners that explains when money was money, when it was real and sound as a dollar meant something, you could actually save your money and it would be worth something more in the future. Now, with this fiat money and unbacked by anything of substance, we can only count on saving it and watching it buy less in the future. So if you'd like to get our free audio CDs that explain the topics that we've discussed today, the first one is titled The Federal Reserve. It's a half-hour audio CD on the Federal Reserve and what it is and how it functions. The second is the definition of money. What the heck is a dollar anyway? And how do I know that the dollars that I have in the bank are going to be safe tomorrow? And the third and most important, protecting your wealth. That tells you how to move out of Federal Reserve notes and into the constitutional money of the United States. If you want all three of these audio CDs and the companion pamphlets, all you have to do is mention that you heard it on Beyond 50 with Daniel and call us at 800-468-2646, and we'll send it to you absolutely free. And I urge you to share it with your neighbors, copy it, let the kids listen to it, because everyone should understand how our monetary system works. It's the most important thing to most of us. So the number again is 800-468-2646. Call and get the 3 audio CDs and spread the education, because I think once Americans understand the criticality of this situation, that they will stand up and do what has to be done.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more when it comes to that. It certainly seems we're looking at a change, but the question is changing to what? Changing to further ourselves into the debt that we're already in, or are we actually going to find ourselves potentially coming out of this? I guess we'll find out after November happens one way or the other, won't we?
Right. Well, you know, the last populist president I referenced, Andrew Jackson, he came out with essentially the same thing that Mr. Trump is saying. You know, then we had the First Bank of the United States and the charter replaced by the Second Bank of the United States, and Andrew Jackson ran on the platform. Essentially, he wasn't as kind as Donald, which is, you know, I'll audit the Fed. Andrew Jackson said, if you vote for me, I will kill this bank. And the racist side, if you will, he would gather up all of the Indians and send them out to reservations in the West so that because some of them were killing us. Yeah, some of them were assimilating, some of them were moving in nicely, but there was this small faction of radical Indians that were, you know, butchering settlers and so forth. So all of the unpopular positions taken by Andrew Jackson were, of course, ridiculed in the media and lambasted by the entrenched politicians. But the people saw the wisdom in what he was saying. You know, strong tariffs, a central bank that's owned by the people, pay off your debts, live debt-free. You know, all of those things resonated with America, and they elected Andrew Jackson. And by God, by 1835, he had paid off the national debt. So if Mr. Trump does the same thing, prosperity will reign in this country again, because that's what happened between the 1840s and the Civil War. We were the most prosperous nation on the globe. Railroads were reaching everywhere. Government was not consuming more than it took in, and there was no national debt to pay interest on. It's a much better circumstance. Think of your own circumstance. If you were debt-free, how much more you could provide for your family with the money that you earn instead of just paying interest and principal on debt. So it's a great vision for America, and I hope that Mr. Trump has a chance to provide it.
Well, we'll find out in November. Andrew, thank you so much for joining us here on the program today. If you could give out a website people can find out more. I know I've been on it, and you've got a lot of great articles that people really should be paying attention to and reading.
Yeah, thank you. Andy Goss, ANDYGAUSE. That's my personal website. And then the company that I work for, SDL, has usgoldcoins.com. They're also the ones courteous enough to provide the 3 audio CDs. So if you'd like to get those, either hit the website or call us at 800-468-2646. Don't forget to mention Beyond 50 Radio. That way you'll get them free of charge. That's 800-468-2646.
Very good. Andrew, thank you for joining us here on the program today.
Thanks for having me.
We want to thank you, the listeners out there, for tuning in. Again, you got to rise up and take responsibility for the direction you want your life as well as your country to go. So November will be that time you'll make that decision. You can also discover more by visiting us at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. Sign up for our weekly e-newsletter as well so you can stay updated on what's going on and what's coming up on the program as well. I'm Daniel Davis. Thank you for tuning in. This is the Beyond 50 Radio program. And remember, live your day past halfway.